Hello, everyone. I'm Jim Garrison, and in the spirit of the trees, in the spirit of living nature, of which we are children and an integral part, and with deep gratitude for all of our ancestors, all the generations that have brought us to the present moment, I want to welcome you to this session of Humanity Rising. Today, we want to delve into a single life, a life that has explored more dimensions of spiritual awareness and insight than most people that I know. If you think about your pathway, most of us settle in on one that seems to work for us. It's like our diets, it's like our vocation. And some people are essentially polymaths. They're people with almost a voracious appetite for spiritual experience and understand early on that each pathway is its own tonality and activates something in us that other paths don't activate. And so we want to speak today with a woman, Susan Hess Logeais, who I'll introduce more formally in a moment, who has really been a Renaissance spiritual seeker. And as I've gotten to know her, I was just struck by the diversity of spiritual paths that she has trodden in her life development. So that's our program for today. But before we dive in to that dialogue, I want to invite all of you just to take a moment in the hustle and bustle of our world, as turbulent as it is, to reconnect with that one place that whatever is happening, we can find coherence. And that is in our hearts. So just feel your body for a moment. And close your eyes if you can. And just center yourself in your heart. See if you can just listen to your heartbeat for the next minute or so. And through your heart, feel the depth of your being. Feel gratitude, deep thanksgiving that we're all alive and the spirit beckons. Thank you, everyone. Most of you will remember Susan Hess Logeais from the extraordinary 7-month program she put together last year as we commemorated the 90th birthday of Stan Grof. Each month, Susan brought together people who were important in Stan's life, and his wife, Brigitte Groff, culminating in July on his birthday, where he celebrated his 90th year. I was very struck by Susan's, both her dexterity in bringing people together from all kinds of nooks and crannies, but also by the deep spiritual awareness that she seemed to carry, that was able to bring many personalities and disciplines together, as we honored one of the great creative intelligences of our time. As I got to know her, I found out that she's had an extraordinary life. She's a scholar and an intellectual with degrees in various forms of mythology and religion and psychology. She's been an actress. She's been an activist. She's now working with her husband to develop permaculture and a straw house and home that they're building, and is one of those Renaissance women that inspire us just because of the diversity of the mastery that they've developed over time, which is both a challenge but also an inspiration to all of us about human potential. So Susan, I want to welcome you to Humanity Rising. I'm delighted that you are with us, and I want to begin our conversation by just having you more fully introduce yourself and to tell us a little bit about your upbringing and your spiritual development. And let's just begin a narrative of your spiritual odyssey. And then along the way, Susan will show various photos or images to enhance what she's bringing into the field. And I'll be monitoring the chat and bringing in your questions and comments. But Susan, welcome with deep, deep respect for who you are and what you've embodied in your lifetime. So just tell us your story, and let's begin your spiritual odyssey. Then we'll go from there.
Well, thank you, Jim. That was a beautiful, really lovely introduction that helps me gain deeper understanding of myself. So thank you for mirroring back to me how you see me. That's really helpful. So I think I'm going to base my journey in what I've learned through, in part, our children's Waldorf education. And essentially, the idea that up to the age of 3, we are sort of one with the spiritual world. And then as we pass that 3rd year, we start to become more and more present in this physical moment. And at the age of 9, there's a big neural dieback. And this is what, in the Waldorf community where we were, they describe as the 9-year change. And it's the moment where it's almost like we watched it on our own daughter. When she turned 9, we traveled to France. We had this amazing vacation. She was glum and sullen and very, moody. And it was like we had a teenager on our hands in a 9-year-old. It's because there's this mystery that sort of drops away. And in my life, at that point at 9 years, I remember swinging on a swing set and looking out and going, the magic, there's no magic. This world is flat. It's not interesting. And it just sort of got a little darker over time. And there were dreams. Ballet seemed like the way to reclaim that spiritual, mythical, less physical world. It seemed more etheric. And I was really drawn to that. But then at 18, I realized it's not what I want to do. And it was heartbreaking. And I needed a physical injury to free me from that journey. I didn't really, I didn't have the heart to break my parents' dreams for them to feel somehow that all that money they put into lessons was for naught because I wasn't going to take that professional path. So it was just one of those things where now looking back, I realized that those are the nodes of the moon. And at 9 years, it's the opposite of when you were born. And at 18, it's the conjunction of when you were born. And that's considered like a portal to that place from which our spirits come. And so in that 9 years and at 18 years, there's that moment of possibility to sort of remember what I left, what I came from, and what I'm meant to go toward. And so that was when I realized I am not meant to be a dancer. That's not what I'm going to do. And the next shift in my life was, okay, now what? I didn't really know. I was lost. I was actually suicidal. And because I would say in part, the experience of performing ballet, at that time it was with San Francisco Ballet. I was a student, but I was performing and touring with them. There was an orchestra, an audience of 3,000 people, and you're performing and the music and the energy of the audience. And there was this amazing sense of being one with that entire hall of people. And when that stopped, there was such a feeling of loss. That was that 9-year sense of the magic is gone on steroids. It was this feeling of absolute desolation and hopelessness. So out of that, I got into modeling, which wasn't the best thing for my soul, but it was a chance to sort of get out of my home life and all of these other things. But this gets me back to sort of what brings us to the journey, that inward journey, and that is a sense of dissatisfaction. And so modeling was something that I was focused on. I got into acting, I got married, I did all these things that I thought I needed to do to move myself forward according to the world that I saw around me. And then at the age of 25, that was shattered again through an acting technique that my acting teacher, Warren Robertson, had. He'd learned techniques by going to Rajneeshpurim. And so, yes.
Oh, Bhagwan, boy.
Oh, Bhagwan, yes. And so part of our warm up was to dance really crazy and then move the body as much as we could, and then lay still and feel the energy in the body and recognize that this is the energy of creation. This is the energy of consciousness. And then to go inward, then to sort of look for past pain, to try to find what might connect with a character. And it was excavating. And so I was in a screen test with Nicolas Cage for a film called Thief of Hearts. And I was trying to find the character's guilt for having been unfaithful, which I had been at that point to my husband at that time. We are since divorced. And anyway, I was digging and digging and digging, trying deeply to go into inward as I'm sitting on a set with all these lights around me. And then suddenly I felt like I dropped into a pit, and it was a dark cavern with nothing in it, nothing. And I remember going, my life is a lie. My life is a lie. And it was just like, I bought a house, I'd gotten married, I'd done all these things to lock me into a choice that was wrong. And so I made it through the screen test, don't ask me how. And then I started crying, and I went back to the hotel, and I called my then husband, now my ex-husband, and said, I'm not coming home tonight. And I was in Los Angeles, he was in New York, and that was the end of my marriage. And that began this incredibly challenging period of about 4 or 5 years of trying anything that crossed my path. Now, when I look back, that was Pluto conjunct my natal Neptune. And out of curiosity, I looked at my daughter's chart recently. And when I look at people at the age of 25, there's almost always Pluto conjunct their natal Neptune. And so I think that that's this moment where Pluto is about death, rebirth. Neptune is access to transcendent dimensions of consciousness. It's a possibility for opening. And that was sitting right on top of the nodes, the north and south nodes that are destiny and remembrance of past. And so when I think about that, I realize that the age of 25 for many people is sort of a truth moment where and it's around that age. It could be a couple of years before, a few years after, and that leads you to Saturn return. And Saturn return, 28 up till about 30, that's this sort of, okay, now the foundation for your life. And so that was really the beginning of my exploration of all these various techniques. And I think I made a list of them before we did this. And of course, I started with flotation tanks. That was really amazing. And then I walked over hot coals with Tony Robbins. Then I went to Rajneeshpurim in Madras, Oregon, and we did bioenergetics and rebirthing. Then I did shamanic journey work with Michael Harner. Around that time, I was doing Forrest Yoga. And so all of these things were just sort of opening me up to the possibilities for spiritual connection. Gesundheit, Jim. I see that you sneeze. Anyway, so I don't know if you want to jump in or say anything, but it's
yeah. Well, I want to take it sort of one at a time, just to get the tonality and the flavor that what led you to flotation, for example. I mean, why would you start with flotation?
With that? Well, so I was in New York,
John Levy did a lot of flotation.
Yes,
didn't he?
Yes. And so this is, this is something about synchronicity. So flotation tanks I encountered because when I started stepping away from my marriage and the process of divorce, I also had, I was in connection, my acting teacher, Warren Robertson, just started suggesting movement, starting to suggest that I explore some other, getting more involved with how my body might carry emotion. And so I started doing yoga, and the yoga teacher knew the flotation tank. He actually also offered flotation tanks. So I was introduced to yoga. I also tried some flotation tanks. There was a moment where I decided that I encountered, I don't know where somehow I would see a flyer somewhere that said, Tony Robbins, walk over hot coals. And I was like, okay, let's do it. So I did. And it was powerful. Then I also,
let's pause there, because
okay.
That's quite a thing. Everyone, if you've ever been in that kind of a situation, knowing that if you just put a little match up to your finger, it's going to burn. And then you have 10, 15 feet of hot burning coals you have to walk on. Tell us about what you went through and what you had to overcome in yourself to walk on a bed of hot coals. And you must have at one level been terrified you were going to get burnt. And another level, tell us about it in more detail.
I think perhaps it was, how old was I at that time? Well, I was 25, maybe 26. And there was just a sort of a reckless abandon. It's like, here it is. Okay, I'll try it. And Tony Robbins prepared the room of 500 people. We did it at Madison, across the street from Madison Square Gardens, in a hotel right there. And we did it on the sidewalk of 34th Avenue and 7th Avenue. And there was actually, I think, photographers from Life magazine journaling it and documenting our experience. But he tried to prepare us by telling us that our mind is more powerful than our body, that where we put our thoughts and what we believe is possible will create the reality. And so we had to believe that we were walking on cool moss, and that we were pulling our awareness out of our feet and up into our, whatever, headspace, and that we had the power, I think even above, we had our hands over our heads and we were saying, cool moss, as we walked across. So the idea was mind over matter, focus where, you want an outcome to occur, and create a visual or a belief around what you're encountering in that moment. And so that basically summarizes it. And out of 500 people, not one person burned. So it was interesting. It was really, really interesting. And I believe it was his way of trying to show people that they could take control over their lives, that they didn't need to be victims. And it was at a point where I was going through a difficult divorce. I was being sued for alimony. I'd lost work because I was so erratic and behaving so unusually. And so anyway, it was my chance to sort of reset the narrative and put myself in a position of power over my own life and its outcome.
And did it have a dramatic effect? Because doing something like walking on a bed of coals over a distance is actually quite a spiritual feat.
Mm-hmm. It did.
Was it an ephemeral transformation, or did it in some way permanently enhance your self-esteem about what's possible for you to be and do in the world?
I'd say the second is it definitely gave me a sense of I have control over how I react to any given situation. I did have a false sense of what it could do for me, because this is quite personal, but part of my journey has also been to find self-esteem for myself as a woman. And I lacked self-esteem for myself as a woman and got breast implants at the age of 25, which I felt I needed in order to be a successful actress. And then I ended up feeling so guilty and so ashamed of what I had done to myself that I wasn't even comfortable going out on acting calls, because at that time cable television was coming in and everything was topless. And so I was embarrassed. I was afraid that it would be obvious, that the scars would be obvious. And so there was this deep sense of a lack of self-esteem. And it played out in my sexual activity. I got an IUD so I wouldn't get pregnant. And then I was promiscuous and had relations with men that I didn't really care about, but mostly because I was so concerned that I wasn't going to find another partner, that I kind of believed what my ex-husband had said, which was I was unlovable, that nobody else could stand me. And so part of my liberation was also the acting teacher. One of the first things that he did was he asked the room of students, okay, who's a model? Everybody raises, like 10 of us raise our hands. How many of you are living with men who don't work? We raise our hands. How many of you are told how difficult you are to live with, how lucky you are to have these men in your lives, and how nobody else could stand you? And we raised our hands. And he said, you're being manipulated. Wake up. And so that was really the beginning of the process. Warren Robertson was an amazing acting teacher. I hope he's still with us. Anyway, so this was part of
in this maelstrom that you were walking on a bed of coals, right?
Trying to get this sense of I do have power over my life. I can do something about it. And I still believe that when I actually got really sick I got pelvic inflammatory disease from the IUD. So IUDs are for monogamous relationships, I know now. And I spent 2 weeks in the hospital. And that's when I discovered the value of astrology, because astrology, I had my first astrological reading, and I'd been warned about some kind of health issue, about potential for something about Pearl. I didn't know what. And so it was around all of this that I ended up in the hospital, and my roommate was named Pearl, and she was this amazing Jewish woman. And I shared my story of trying to get a divorce, feeling ashamed, feeling like I was a bad person, and she changed that narrative immediately, told me I was a princess, told me I was amazing. My ex-husband was a bum. He should have been working. And I was reading Charles Tart's book, Non-Ordinary States of Consciousness. And the foreword,
I remember that one.
The foreword was written by Stan Grof. And so that was sort of the beginning of mine saying, there are dimensions of consciousness that I need to encounter. And so often a journey requires some incredible situation that really forces us to look differently at our lives and what we consider to be reality. And so that's why, maybe this collective moment in our human journey is this death rebirth moment where we're all looking at this disaster of war, climate destruction, the political situation, the shootings that are taking place, and we have to ask ourselves, is this what we want? Is this the world that we want to live in? And is this reality? What kind of reality we want? So I try to see parallels between my journey and the collective experience, because it has to serve more than me. That's what I've come out of it. Yeah.
Sure. So astrology came at that moment as a deep illumination into the depth of the personality of Susan.
Yes, and it also taught me, this is still Neptune and Pluto. This is, and then this big transition. But what astrology does is it provides us with an understanding of the forces that are at work, the archetypal forces that are at work in the universe, and that we are writing them. They are working through us, and to pay attention, and so that when we find ourselves in moments of deep feelings of loss and desolation and isolation, that we can look outside and try to get a sense of, you're not alone. This is a journey that every soul takes. These are cycles in a lifetime. And how do we get through them? What are the techniques that allow us to get through them? And yoga was a huge technique for me. And a woman named Anna Forrest in particular was remarkable. She focuses on, as does Rajneeshpurim, because before Anna Forrest was Rajneeshpurim, bioenergetics, exhausting muscle mass so that memories are released. And when you do that, this was a room of maybe 50 people, and they have us walking in a circle with our arms over our head going, huh, huh, huh. And, just 20 minutes, I'm tired. I sit down. The facilitators come over and say, get up. I'm going, I'm resting. They're going, no, get up. And you're meant to be tired. We want you exhausted. An hour of stomping and chanting with your arms over your head, your humanity drops away. This sort of primal anger, nasty human quality comes out of you, where you're just surviving and horribly angry at everybody. And then everybody stops. And then the facilitators walk through the room and they touch people where they could see tension held in the body. And every person they touched immediately started sobbing. And so all this emotion was released because the physical muscles, the body had been exhausted. And so our bodies are sponges for the pain that we encounter over the course of our lives. And so to have some technique, and Anna Forrest's technique is holding positions in yoga for a very long period of time, so that the muscles are exhausted and the emotion is released. And I found such freedom in that work that when eventually my breast implants were being rejected from my body, I was able to have the courage to own my sense of shame and release it. It was Anna who found an article in Mother Jones that named the surgeon who put my implants in, that revealed that I'd been part of a study, that they were covered with a polyurethane foam that was meant for furniture, that was dissolving and becoming cancerous. And so I found a restorative or a reconstructive plastic surgeon who removed the implants. And Anna's class prayed for me during the surgery, and I healed perfectly. I was able to have 2 children and breastfeed afterwards, and many years later, I should say, 10 years later. So it was this amazing situation, and learning how to release the pain in the body, learning that when you have a physical injury, there's some emotion attached to it, and to just sort of let the body speak to you. And so that has taught me a lot. And I'm very grateful for the experience I had at Rajneeshpurim for that, and for what I learned from Anna Forrest. And then, of course, rebirthing was the other thing they taught at
Well, but
Rajneeshpurim.
before we jump to
Okay.
rebirthing, let's pause, because I think
Yeah.
what you're touching on now is so important in a world full of trauma.
Mm-hmm.
And Thomas Hubel's work and the work of many people on transgenerational trauma and how it's located in the body. And I'd love to have you speak a little bit more, because all of us are now traumatized in ways that we've never experienced before. And trauma now is building up on top of trauma.
Yes.
You got climate change, you got Ukraine, you've got mass shootings, you've got inflation, you've got this, you've got that. And people are beginning to collapse under the weight of the trauma, under the weight of the stress. So whatever we can do that can release that in an ongoing way is really important for us to learn from. So just say a little bit more about the technique, so that the shaking of your body, and as the emotions then begin to surface in your consciousness, as your body does the whole movement or whatever, in the exhaustion, then what? How does that process actually work?
Well, so that was a particular process that they called bioenergetics, which is, it's essentially exhausting muscle mass to release emotion. You can also do it through Rolfing. You can do it through deep tissue massage. You can do it through a sweat lodge. I'd say you can also do it through rebirthing, but you can do it through deep meditation, Vipassana. And so essentially, yoga in particular is the body. And the idea of not the Western approach to yoga, which is very athletic and everybody trying to get super strong and do all these amazing poses. Anna Forrest, I hate to do a screen share because it will distract me from what we're describing, but Anna Forrest defies gravity. She was always on her hands. She could do anything upside down. It was just amazing to watch her. It was so inspiring. And her work was really, that exhaustion of muscle mass and release of emotion. The trauma is generational because, in fact, healing our ancestors is healing what we carry in our own bodies. Richard Rudd speaks about gene keys and the idea that our genetics, the DNA that we carry, is coming down that physical pipeline of our ancestors. And so we are carrying their trauma. I have memories of being beheaded. I have memories of being drowned. I've learned that a family member in Latvia was beheaded by a Cossack. So is that my past life or my ancestors' life? Being drowned as a witch during the Salem trials, that came as a memory during a Vipassana retreat. Well, Christina Groff had the same memory. Many women have the same memory. Is that the collective memory of the 9 million witches that were killed over the course of centuries? So it's hard to know exactly what those memories are, but the techniques to clear them are multiple. The yoga's great. I'm finding currently that in working on the land, digging in the dirt, planting, watching the seasons, really anchoring myself in the earth, and periodic deep meditation, I use cannabis. I'll use a small amount of cannabis and smoke it. There's a ritual that a woman that I know does where it's the most high amounts of THC of sativa, indica, and a hybrid ground together and smoked, and then powerful music, and to feel yourself become a conduit for the energy of the divine, which is this higher, it's a more rarefied frequency. That is also the pressure. It's also, I believe, forcing all the change to take place. It's causing people to sort of freak out and snap, because if you're not able to handle this higher frequency rate, then you're going to start to come apart. So you have to learn how to channel it. And the earth is the grounding. You've got to give it to the earth. And so walking barefoot on the earth, gardening, digging, caring for animals, doing something with nature, restorative, like I'm about to take a course in habitat restoration, going out into the woods and figuring out, how do I make up for the damage we've done? How do I heal the land after all the dirt we moved? How do I bring back, the plants that provide habitat for the natural world? So those are things that I would recommend. But being, first of all, aware that something's going on, and then, is it meditation? Is it Vipassana? Is it rebirthing? Holotropic breath work? Is it psychedelics? You need to crack the shell and open yourself up and become a channel for that divine energy that's coming down and ground it into the earth.
Tell us about your rebirth experience. What was that all about?
Well, rebirthing is again, you're panting on the ground, very similar to holotropic breath work, in it's a rapid, regular, consistent breathing. And I needed one of the facilitators to come and take my legs and bend them. You're laying flat, your legs are bent with feet on the ground, but she needed to take my legs and sort of bend them onto my chest so that it caused a sort of a fetal position. And then there was this profound dropping into the deepest pain I'd ever imagined. And it just keeps going deeper and deeper and deeper. And you think, I'm never going to survive it. And then you burst through to the other side, and it's nothing but light. And that was the experience that allowed me to survive the divorce, the hospitalization, everything. Yeah, because I knew I could get through it. I knew I could get through it. That no matter what happened, I can always get through to the other side. So, and in fact, holotropic breath work or rebirthing, these are the rites of passage that were integral to indigenous peoples around the world. These were the things that going into, like, a rite of passage from childhood into adolescence was this re-experiencing the birth process, so that you would have the maturity to assume responsibility, that you would overcome these fears, these unconscious fears that keep us from becoming fully mature. And, if you want to do a parallel of, birth to age three to, say 18 or 19, where we're fully incarnate, according to Rudolf Steiner, humanity had that infant stage, toddler phase, adolescent phase. Well, now it's time to hit the adult phase. Humanity has to go into this phase where we're no longer one with the mother. We don't need a distant father, authoritative figure that tells us what to do, the sky god. Now we need that spiritual knowledge within our own hearts. And we're one with the spiritual, we're one with the mother, and it's anchored in our heart. That's the mature human, and that's what we're moving toward.
And through rebirthing, I imagine you got in touch with the whole reality of reincarnation and the transmigration of souls, or was it more just a birthing experience, sort of an existential birthing experience that gave you the sense that whatever's going on around me, I can make it through to the light?
Exactly. It was that. It was really focused about the birth. It wasn't until I encountered shamanic journey work with Michael Harner. And this was also just around the time of prior to the breast implant removal and all the other healing that took place. But I encountered Michael Harner, who I didn't learn until much later was one of Stan Grof's best friends. And I didn't know either, because when I was 12 years old, this is so hard to understand, in the library of my grade school, there was 11, I think, there was Don Juan, Teachings of a Yaqui Shaman or whatever, the Teachings of Don Juan by Carlos Castaneda, in the library for me in 6th grade to find and check out. I know.
You read Castaneda when you were in the 6th grade?
Yes.
Oh my goodness.
We was on a family trip to Mexico, and I read it, and I remember going, that's what life should be.
Totally.
Of course, this is what it should be. So I didn't know that Michael Harner was the one that convinced Carlos Castaneda to write the book. And that when I did the shamanic journey work with Michael Harner, that's when I encountered dimensions of consciousness. That's when I encountered a soul group. I encountered my animal spirits. I have a group, and I remember, he'd say, meet your teacher, and I saw a circle. And then, meet your animal spirit, and I saw a circle. And then I remember going to Michael and saying, I have more than one. And he goes, yes, I know, I've seen them. And I said, okay. And he goes, that's just what you have. I said, all right. And the other thing, and this is really interesting because I encounter people who feel very strongly about Christianity or Buddhism or Hinduism, or they're Muslim, and whatever their belief system is, they have the various deities or saints that they believe in that are so profoundly inherent to that perspective. Well, when I did the shamanic journey work the first time, it was in my mind that it had to be First Nations. It had to be Hopi Indian. And so, of course, all my teachers were dressed like Kachinka dolls. So they had headdresses and masks. And I thought, oh, I've really met them. I've really met my spirits. Well, I ended up changing techniques. And I shifted to something called A Course in Light with Tony Moltzan, which is a guided meditation that brought me to the same place. And now when I met my spirit guides, they took off their outfits. And now they were just light beings. And I realized that the spiritual dimensions will present themselves to us in whatever form we will accept. And so this idea of deities being particular, saints being particular to any particular religious belief system, I believe, is just what that individual will accept based on their what they've been taught, what they believe in. And I'm sure there's 100,000 million spiritual beings that are there to help us, but I believe the ones that humanity encounters are not so different. I think that they're about the same source of energy, just meeting us in a form that we can accept.
Yes, yes, yes. Well, I'm just reading Castaneda's, one of his last books, The Art of Dreaming. And because for me, I don't know of anyone who's more powerfully articulated the mystical path than Castaneda. From the moment I read his first book in college, I realized that there was a deep authenticity to what he was saying. And I've often said, if I've had a guru over the years, it's been Castaneda, because of the raw, there's no ideology.
Yeah.
It's just a raw experience of sorcery, of consciousness itself as it's been mediated. And he makes that point too, that the universe is so dimensionalized that when you enter it, it will manifest itself to you in exactly the kind of garb that is required, not by it, but by you to wake you up.
Exactly. In order to see it. And so that's so powerful, and Vipassana meditation, that's the other situation where it was taught by SM Goenka. That was the technique that I learned. And you go for 10 days. You don't talk to anybody. You don't eat any. It's, you're served and food. You don't even pay. You make a donation at the end. And you're sitting there certain days going, this is torture meditation. I don't want to sit here and be in pain all day long with my back burning and my knees cooking. I don't want to do this. And then the next day he says, today you probably thought, or that evening, because there's always a talk, he would say, now you're probably saying, I don't like this torture meditation. I don't want to sit here in pain for hours at a time. This is why we take your keys and why you're not allowed to leave. Or like a few days later, now you're probably remembering past lives. And it's like, I did that day, remember past lives. So there was there's sort of this, and Brigitte actually was talking about the same thing, how they were describing the phases of unraveling.
Yes.
And I call it the shell, and something has to crack that shell. And that shell is what we build around ourselves, I believe, to fully incarnate. And that if we have some technique that can start to open it, that can start to give us the chance to sort of see beyond it, then we're able to kind of unravel the veil, or thin it to the point where we have a better idea of what's on the other side.
Well, and I think that the power of Vipassana, I mean, it's the power of the breath. I mean, the Buddha called it.
Yeah.
You know, in the end, ladies and gentlemen, just breathe.
Yes.
And we can do all these other things to enhance, but the exhalation and inhalation of our breath itself is all that's required for all the enlightenment that we seek. I mean, that's actually one of the most profound realizations in the history of mysticism, is the power of the breath. I just got John Nestor's book called Breath. It was a New York Times bestseller list last year, and have been re-familiarizing myself with the power of breathing. And so, I mean, you know, your journey, you do this for 10 days, you just sit there and breathe, and naturally transformations will take place.
Exactly.
And well, how did you come out the other side?
Well, okay, so this is very interesting. Up until this point, probably because I'm not quite sure whether it was the IUD and the pelvic inflammatory disease, or whether it was the breast implants and the tissue adherences that were taking place, but I ended up struggling to have children. And it had to do with fallopian tube sort of adherences that were blocking, and I was going to have a surgery, and I wasn't quite sure about you know, whether I'd be able to have children, and then we would adopt. And I was making peace. I was making peace with the idea of going under, because for me, every time I have general anesthesia at that stage of my life, was I could go, you know, because I wasn't always so happy here. And I always felt that anesthesia would be an opportunity to leave. And so I always looked at a deep surgery as a chance that, you know, if I wanted, I could leave. And I would say, not yet, not yet. So I did Vipassana prior to this surgery because I wanted to be at peace with whatever happened. And what happened during the course of it is you sit 3 times a day for 1 hour without moving. And I would take it to the point where if I felt like I needed to cough, no. If a fly landed on my nose, no. If even a belch, no. My knees are on fire, I'll never walk again, I'm not moving. And you're just observing the body. You're scanning the body from head to toe, back and forth, scanning. It's led by a recorded voice. They're assistant teachers that help with something if you need it in this particular technique of Goenka. And at the end of 10 days of that, you know, you come out on the other side clear, clean. It's like a blowtorch. I mean, you take a blowtorch to that shell and you blast it off. And so then I went back to my now husband, Olivier, and he said that I looked like a shining light. He said he could not believe how much light I was giving off, and I couldn't stop talking because I had not talked for 10 days.
It's a lot of light.
A lot of light. And we moved around that time, shortly after, and there were they cut down a tree, and there were sections of the tree that we wanted to keep to sit on in the garden, and there was one that we couldn't load into a wheelbarrow because it was too heavy. It kept tipping the wheelbarrow, and then I said, well, I think I can lift it. And so, sorry, that was my dog. And so I squatted down and I picked it up and I lifted it and I carried it about 10,000 feet, or I don't know how many feet, but I carried it quite a distance. We had a 10,000 square foot lot, and I carried it, the length of it, set it down, and my husband was just like, what was that? And it was this sort of mind over matter, back to the walking over hot coals, back to the Vipassana. Here I am in this incredibly, difficult moment, but my mind is more powerful than my body. And the surgery was a total success. I had to have they went in, they checked it out. They were able to clear away the adherences, and I was pregnant 12 days later. So that's how I look at Vipassana, as this amazing opportunity to clear away the karmic, the ancestral, the whatever it is that we're carrying, that we have been accumulating, that we need to clear, not just for ourselves, but for those that preceded us, our ancestors. And that these are all the things that, another technique that I, again, just like Forrest Yoga, just like bioenergetics, rebirthing, holotropic breath work, Vipassana is remarkable.
Yeah. Say something about Forrest Yoga.
Well, again, that's Anna, and that is that,
we're rushing along, everyone, because this woman has had so many experiences. I want to try to get to them all.
Well, let me see if I can. I'm going to see if I can. Where's my little? I'm going to see if I can share my screen quickly.
Yeah, please do.
I'm going to find this image of Anna, and then I'm going to share it. And let's see, let's get it over here. And now I will, let me see, why won't it show up in I'll have to share my desktop and see if I can make it bigger, because it's not showing up in a way that everyone can see it. So there we go. That's Anna Forrest. Wow. And that's when I met her. Wow. And she's just an amazing human being. She's so capable of doing this work, and her whole life was really dedicated, in her own journey, was helping people heal, help them go beyond their sense of what's possible. And she's still teaching. She's still really, really powerful in that way. But in that moment in my life, it was absolutely what I needed to do, to help me, work through what was possible. So I'm grateful, so grateful for her time in my life, and just the karmic sort of synchronicity of her finding that article, of me being able to remember the doctor's name. It was 9 years later to know that I'd been part of a study, that he'd lied to me. And, all these things were really powerful. And then the other thing I'd like to add to all of this is that these are things that are experiential. And the bulk of my life up until my mid-30s was experiential, which is really powerful. But it also parallels a course that your university teaches for a PhD or a doctoral degree. And that is, you have to balance the experiential with the scientific, with the understanding. You need to have something to, some language, some other perspective that helps you share what you've learned in a way that other people can relate to, and for yourself to expand that understanding that you've just encountered, and to start to see how other people have experienced that. And then you start to grow your own understanding. And I made a joke earlier, the Indra's net of spiritual experiences. So quantum physics. My introduction was Deepak Chopra, quantum healing. Then I encountered Amit Goswami, and I did the self-aware universe. And then I took an 8-day course with him, a 7-day course.
Oh, wow.
Here at a local university that's no longer in existence, where I live in the Portland, Oregon area. He was teaching. And so I got a heavy dose of quantum physics from Amit Goswami. I learned spatial dynamics with Jaimen McMillan. This is a movement technique that makes you aware of the space around you and the space within you. Because when you look at the quantum world, I believe it was, I've heard it said many times, but most recently by Brian Swim, during my course at CIIS, he was talking about If you take away all the space in our bodies, we're the size of a grain of salt. That's the actual matter in our bodies. And so spatial dynamics is about being aware of the space within you and the space around you and your relationship to that space, and how you can be drawn into movement, how you can participate with the space around you. And then, of course, archetypal astrology with Becca Tarnas and Richard Tarnas and Laura Michetti, who taught the program that I took at CIIS. That's this idea of the archetypal forces that are at work on us. Yeah. So that we're developing a relationship with the space around us. We're expanding our understanding of how we are one with the universe. We are both the micro and the macro simultaneously.
And let's dive into archetypal astrology for a moment, because that's associated with, in its origins, with psychedelics. Mm-hmm. And Stan Grof and Richard Tarnas trying to figure out what would determine a good trip from a bad trip. And they couldn't figure it out until it was suggested to them there might be some astrological component to it. And when they started to do the charts, they realized that there was an extraordinary alignment between Pluto, Neptune, Saturn, Jupiter, etc. in one's chart, and how a psychedelic experience, which in its essence opens you up to the cosmos, to the space out there, will affect your experience during the duration of the plant medicine. So that opens up, I think, something that you've been experimenting in, because you've been in astrology for many, many years, and then you began to use cannabis and then psychedelics. Talk to us a little bit about that journey and the relationship between the archetypal aspects of the solar system and the cosmos and the psychedelic experience.
Well, yeah. So to clarify, early on, I mean, I've been getting an astrological reading almost every year for about 20 years. And up until this last few years, I had no idea what it all meant. I just let other people tell me what they saw. And it wasn't until I started studying to get my master's in the PCC program at CIIS that I started to really study it and make sense of it. And the way it really makes sense to someone is when you go backwards, is when you go back to these difficult moments of your life, or the most transitional, powerful, transformative moments of your life, and you look at where the planets were. And there are many programs for doing this. I use something called Astro Gold, but if you can go backwards and look at a moment of your life, you have your natal chart and you have the transits at that moment. And you can kind of watch them over a period of years and sort of watch how, like at the age of 25, that's why, oh my God, Neptune was on top of it. That's why I had, Pluto was on top of Neptune. That's why I had all these powerful, transcendent, transformative experiences that were so disruptive that I went off into illusion. And yes, it was a death rebirth, but it was a total game changer for me. It was an epiphany, and it completely changed my path. And so when it comes to psychedelics, I started to, even before I understood what was, what the planets meant, and I would take a look at my chart and go, well, what's going to happen if that's there? Oh, look, all these planets are on top of each other. That might be interesting, And so I would schedule timing, and now I can look back and go, oh yeah, that was interesting. And there are certain combinations that are more powerful than others. Neptune, Saturn combinations can be very dark journeys. And I had one recently that was dark in that way. And it's gotten to the point where the psychedelics are less important to me. I don't need them to the extent that I did, because life is so tipsy-turvy these days. Everything's so crazy. And if I just look to see what's influencing me, I can take a deep breath and calm down. But So yes, it was exactly what you described, that the psychedelic journeys could be sort of understood prior. If you looked at a person's chart, you would have some idea of what they would encounter. It's also how people have understood spiritual emergence, when just spontaneously something happens and there's maybe what might appear to be a psychotic break, but in actuality it's an opening. There's someone that I know recently who was having a challenge between what is reality and what is dimensions of consciousness. Where am I in this moment? There was a lack of clarity, and when we looked at her chart, Neptune Saturn conjunction. And so it's a challenging moment, but if you hang on, and if the people around you recognize that this will pass, that's the best thing I got from Rajneeshpurim. This too shall pass.
Yeah.
Nothing is forever. No matter how bad it might seem in any minute or any moment or years of time, this too shall pass. And if you can hang on and navigate that and know what's working on you, then when you get to the end, when you get to the other side, you will have had so much, strength gained and potentially greater access.
This is really extraordinary. Thank you so much for being so revelatory and disclosive. This is just marvelous. Catherine Augustine is asking two questions. One,
okay.
Is your astrological readings, are they more on the Vedic system or the tropical system? And then the second question is for you to say more about reviewing the charts, not only backwards in time, but how do you use your charts in your experience? Because there's many different frameworks, etc., moving forward. What would be your observations about using the chart from the present forward as opposed to just to the past?
Well, so I have never had a Vedic reading, so I can't speak to that. Although Swami Chaitanananda, who has taught me a meditation technique that I use, and also brought the Tibetan Buddhist practice of CHOD to a community that I participate in, not as often as I should. He did a Vedic reading and suggested the rings that I wear. So this is a yellow sapphire yellow sapphire, and it's supposed to be worn on this index finger of my right hand, and this is coral that's supposed to be worn on this finger of my left hand, because this is the house that it's in. These are the planets that might work in my favor or against me, or if I use them in this way, I will have a greater balance in my life. And so Vedic astrology uses stones to balance a person's chart, and it has been helpful. So that's all I know about Vedic astrology, and they do not recognize Neptune, Pluto, or Uranus. So they don't see those planets. And I do recognize from archetypal astrology that those are the planets that are probably the most influential: Pluto, Neptune, Uranus, Saturn, and Jupiter. Those are the ones that are really in charge. And so looking backward, those are the planets that are influencing you in very powerful ways. Looking forward, it might just, if I'm in it in the moment, I'll kind of consider forward, like, how much longer is this going to last? And just sort of go, okay, buckle up and get used to it and make peace with it. I don't really look forward that much, because I do believe, as I learned in quantum physics, that the expectation can often bring about a result. I would rather sort of meet the world with a clear sense of what I expect coming toward me. And if anything, I'd rather dream about beauty and a verdant planet and a thriving, diverse human community surrounded by an even larger natural world. And that's kind of the vision that I hold, and I'm not so caught up on the specifics.
Gotcha. Well, I just as an aside to Catherine, your question, the Vedic astrology is actually more astrologically or astronomically accurate.
Mm-hmm.
They track it exactly where it is, where the tropical system is not as astronomically accurate, and it has much more to do with the moon cycles and other aspects. And that's been one of the tensions between the Vedic and the tropical systems is the accuracy. But you know that in terms of archetypal astrology, what has always fascinated me, Susan, about Rick Tarnas's book Cosmos and Psyche is the way it's not just individual.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it affects the movement of culture. Yes. And the shape of history, where the Pluto Uranus alignment in the 60s, or with the 2014 Arab Revolt and so forth and so on, so that astrology is not just an individual reading your natal chart every day. It's a planetary influence. I mean, one knows also about the sun flares, the rise and fall of the sun flares every 11 years and so forth and so on. So the archetypal aspects of astrology are planetary wide, I would
Mm-hmm.
say.
Yeah, no, I would, that is really what I've gained from the archetypal perspective, and Rick Tarnas's book, Cosmos and Psyche, and this limited series that they've developed, which I wish I had seen, but I was not here. Anyway, it's coming out, I'm sure, soon. But to recognize, and this is what's so important, is to recognize that we are not alone. You know, the idea of, again, another idea of quantum physics is non-locality. You can separate an electrons that are paired, one's positive, one negative. You can separate them by a Faraday chamber, which is impervious to electromagnetic signal. You can change the spin of one of them, and the other one simultaneously changes so that they remain paired. And so they call this, I think it's the EPK experiment. It was Einstein and two other physicists who were trying to disprove it. They didn't have the means at the time, but later the means were available, and their effort to try to prove it wrong proved it right. And so this just tells us that we are part of the totality of everything. We are part of the universe. We're made out of stardust. We are part of humanity. We are part of everything. We are part of nature. And so, you know, we're built out of the planet. We're mycelium networks in our, I mean, that's in nature, but the microbiome is also shared with the natural world. So we're not individual on any level. And we do have our individuated consciousness, but our existence is
exactly
entwined with everything. Exactly. And so the archetypal perspective shows us that this is at work on everybody. And it's the Pluto return of the United States. It's the death rebirth of the United States, and you see it. You see it in the attempt toward authoritarianism in the Republican Party, and the, you know, sort of kind of not willingness to stand up of the Democratic Party, and the extreme positions, and this
that's the Pluto return.
It is the moment of truth.
Yeah.
The moment of truth.
Yeah, just to amplify that for a moment, everyone, you know, your Saturn return. Every 28 years later, your Saturn comes back to where it was when you were born. There's also a Pluto return, and that takes 248 years. Well, the United States is experiencing its Pluto return right now. So it's going through hell, literally, at its Pluto return. And so that's one way, as Susan is indicating, that is helpful for us to understand what's going on, so you don't get kind of fractured by the centrifugal force of the craziness that's happening. Once you understand, oh, US is going through its Pluto return, all of a sudden you just have a way to understand it. It doesn't make it easier to bear, but it makes it more understandable. And therefore you can navigate through it with more awareness and clarity. So that's a quick example of the utility of archetypal astrology.
And I would add to that, Jim, so death, rebirth, if we're associated with the United States, if we're living in the United States, if we're United States citizens or residents, what can we be doing in our own lives to be, looking into that shadow nature that we all carry, and to find those things that we can let go of. Try building a house with somebody, and or developing a property with somebody, and you'll encounter all kinds of your own shadows. That's what I'm finding right now. And I'm not always right, and I don't always get my way, and so it's just endless let go. Just let go. Hold on to what you believe in, and be open to the idea that you're not always right. You don't always get your way. You could be surprised. There is always a new perspective, and be open.
Yeah. Now, just as we begin to bring this to a summary here, I want to just explore how you've experienced the cumulative impact of all your spiritual experiences. And I think in the first instance, as you look back on your life, I mean, from the flotation to walking on coals, to bioenergetics, to Vipassana, Bhagwan, Sri Rajneesh, etc., psychedelics, archetypal astrology, etc. Has there been a particular experience or experiences that you look back on and you say, that was it? That was like one of the most powerful experiences I've ever had, and I'm deeply grateful for that experience. Is there one or two that stand out as seminal?
Oh yeah, I mean the Rajneesh experience with the bioenergetics and rebirthing, that was incredible.
Oh wow.
Yeah, the shamanic journey work, learning how to access dimensions of consciousness, and finally realizing that the voices I was hearing in my head were my guides. It wasn't me talking to myself. That the ability to hear wisdom coming to you, to recognize and to trust that you have inner wisdom. That was the biggest thing with the shamanic journey work that changed my life. And for those 3 years that I did it daily, and even when I changed techniques, they were downloading so much information that it carried me through the rest of my life. And then, of course, Vipassana. Vipassana was just so powerful. That blowtorch of working the stuff off of me, and the 8 years that I was working with Stan, and having 17, at this point, close to maybe 20 psychedelic experiences that were, again, that was Pluto opposite my sun. The entire period was how many death rebirths can I have? How many versions of what I consider to be reality can I wipe away? And what I'm left with after all of this is a desire to learn more, because I feel that that it's my job to learn as much as I possibly can, so that whomever I encounter, whatever situation I encounter, I have a bigger toolkit. I have a greater potential for helping find a solution, for helping find a combination of perspectives, for helping be that mirror that you were for me at the beginning of this conversation, to someone who's trying to find their way, so that they can see themselves from my perspective. They can see themselves from what I see as their potential, that I can see beyond a present moment where they might feel diminished or powerless in some way. And that I might grow my understanding of how I can participate in the creation of every moment, because that's the other truth. We're creating the world we live in with each breath. And if our ideas and the energy that we carry and that we hold, if the more we refine and purify that over time, the greater chance we have of bringing into being a better reality for us to live in.
Beautifully put, beautifully put. You know, another aspect that I'd love to have your comment on, I remember when I was doing my PhD at Cambridge, I had the great privilege actually of being a very lowly caretaker at a meditation center that was operated by a group, Cambridge Dons, called Epiphany Philosophers. Rupert Sheldrake, that's how I met Rupert Sheldrake. He was one of the EPs, as we called them. And my job, Susan, was to keep the place basically tidy and bring out tea and cookies for the different groups as they came in, and then clean up. And, you know, that was my job. And what I noticed was that I hadn't really thought about it much, but I kind of assumed that all practices were so basically the same and the same kinds of people went. But what I observed over a number of years was that different personalities were attracted, say, to the Bhagwan work, as opposed to the Quakers, as opposed to the Buddhists, as opposed to the TM folks. And that was a real learning, and it was kind of not a shock, but it was a surprise that spiritual pathways, one size doesn't fit all. Mm-hmm. That different people at different times in their lives and different personalities are attracted to different aspects. So you're someone who's experienced almost all of it. And I wonder what your comment would be about the personality profiles of the different techniques. And you know, in terms of your sequencing, that flotation, for example, might have been exactly what you needed mm-hmm. at a very young age, but doing flotation now, and as a more mature woman, right. may not have the impact it did at a different level and a different stage of life, but also a different personality profile. Yeah. Having gone through all those experiences, what would be your comment on that?
Well, you know, I think it's really interesting you say that, because, you know, Vipassana was like running a marathon every 3 times a day. It took so much out of you to sit there and do it, at least for me. But for somebody who does it regularly, I'm sure it's nothing, you know, or maybe not nothing, but not like it was for me. The walking over hot coals, I think there are periods in people's lives. There are some people who want authority. There are some people who want to be nurtured. There are some people who need, you know, a real challenge in order to feel like a warrior mentality. I think I have a lot of warrior energy. And so I'm drawn to things that are physical challenges that, you know, a recent, not so recent, but my last experience with ayahuasca, I dry heaved for 5.5 hours. That's hard. That's really hard at 60, almost 4. And so there are things that I'm drawn to because of that. And now at 64, it's like, I don't want to do that anymore. You know,
I've been there, done that, ladies and gentlemen.
I don't need to do that anymore. I don't need to do that anymore. You know, or maybe once every 5 years, you know, if there's something really hard that I need to see. But so I think either it's a phase of one's life, or it's the quality of one's energy, or where you're at in the moment. Do I want to be nurtured and feel one with and float in a tank? Do I want to experience the guidance of spiritual teachers and or animal spirits through shamanic journey work? Do I want to go to yoga and exhaust my muscles until I'm breaking through with emotion? Or would I rather do holotropic breath work, where I can do the breathing and it will come up naturally? You know, or sound healing. Do I want to have a sound bath? And so I think it just sort of depends on where you are in your life. Yeah. And I think there are those warriors who have gone at it with almost the fervor of training for a marathon or a triathlon. And then at the very end, perhaps they shift toward, I'd rather do yin yoga. You know, I'd rather just stretch. So, you know,
Sean Mitchell is making an interesting point in the chat that the pathways and the timing also depends on our capacity for the awareness that technique is bringing is a vehicle to bring in for us.
Exactly.
So you can do the wrong practice at the wrong time. So part of it is an intuitive appreciation for where your awareness wants to go and what technique is the key to unlock that. So,
and I'll add to that, there's that part of us, beautifully said, that part of us that is drawn to something. And that what I found is then there's that part of me that's going, ooh, I don't know if I can handle it, and then I kind of listen to that, ooh, I don't think I can handle it, go, oh, what are you avoiding? Like, what is it that I'm not willing to look at? And so there's a balance of being, yes, this is something I need to do because it feels like a challenge that I need to go through. I need to go past it so that I'm able to do the other thing. And that is only something an individual can know for themselves. And sometimes you can be drawn to something because it seems so lovely and beautiful. And when you're in it, it can become a little deeper and harder than you realized, because, there are forces at work that draw us into things. And, it's like Richard Tarnas was saying in our interview for the documentary, The Way of the Psychonaut, it can't be a fake death rebirth. You have to really think you're dying in order for that transformation.
Yeah, you can't fake this one.
No. So you can be drawn to it, think, oh, this is so easy and beautiful, and then suddenly you're in it going, oh my God, but it's what you need.
Well, and final question is around the distinction between psychedelics and spiritual practices. And maybe I'm just drawing from my own. I haven't had nearly the diversity of experiences that you have, but my own experience is that psychedelics have been in a category all by themselves. And what I mean by that is that when one does yoga or rebirthing or even holotropic breath work, there's a kind of a relationship in an organic way with particularly with breathing. But when you take a tab of acid or psilocybin, particularly large doses, you're then in a chemical process that is stronger than you are and deconstructs you sort of ready or not. So as I look back on my lifetime of spiritual practices, I would say the most powerful transformers for me have been the psychedelic experiences, because they shattered something in a very short period of time that I didn't expect. I probably would have never welcomed had I known what was going on. But in the aftermath of which, as I kind of put myself back together, I was profoundly thankful for. Mm-hmm. So would you agree with that, or would you have a different point of view, having given all your experiences?
Well, I would say that I completely agree. I mean, psychedelics, you take ayahuasca, you participate in a ritual with psilocybin, or you do LSD. You're on the ride and you're not getting off until it's over. Yeah, and that's it. And
ready or not, you're
ready or not, you're jumping off the bridge, and that bungee cord is going to snap when you hit the bottom, and you're going to bounce back up. So that's it. And the spiritual perspectives, I would say that Vipassana is probably the one that comes closest, in the sense that it's so powerful. When you're in it, it's so strong, but it lasts an hour at a time. And in the form that Goenka teaches or taught, because he's no longer with us, it lasts for 10 days. And you're, for 3 days introduction, and then you're doing it. Now that I've been very public with my, psychedelic use, I can't go back, because they don't want people having had psychedelic experiences to participate in their courses. But Spirit Mountain offers also Vipassana. Jack Kornfield is the founder of that retreat center, and they don't have the same perspective. And so, but the thing with the psychedelic experiences is that that shattering, I believe, is necessary for a lot of people right now. I think that many people are so caught in where they're at, that they're just not going to work their way through it without something that strong. And it can be that you need one, and then these other techniques can help unravel the rest. But I did have at Studio 54 back in the day when I was 19, my first LSD experience. And that was my first experience of something way outside of myself. It was amazing. I had so much fun. You know, it comes in waves. I remember dancing home at 7 a.m. up Columbus Avenue, saying I love myself, you know. And then I looked in the mirror and was like, oh my God, you know, you could see every vein, every, you know, capillary. It was like, horrifying. But that, I believe, opened the door for me to get what I needed out of everything else. And smaller amounts of psychedelics have also been transitional moments in my life where I could just sort of look back at the world and see a different perspective and go, oh, this is what I need to do, and this is how I'm going to get there.
Boy, what an extraordinary life you've led. And just as we close then, given our time where escalating turbulence at almost every level is now the norm, is there a technique, Susan? Is there an admonition? Is there a piece of wisdom for our community that you would leave us with, or you would suggest as a technique particularly suited for the kind of turbulence that we're experiencing right now?
Well, I would recommend, what I really think we need to be doing is realigning ourselves with the planet. And I feel that you know, solstice, summer solstice coming up, June 21st, you know, or June 20th, June 21st, I believe, the winter solstice, the equinoxes, these planetary shifts that cause the seasons to change. We need to reconnect with the rhythms of the planet and to anchor ourselves in nature in a way that grounds us. It'll make it so much easier, because then you're watching your plants, you're watching your garden, you're watching the patterns of clouds and rain or no rain, drought, whatever it is, and we're entering into relationship. The David F. Peat wrote about it in Blackfoot Physics. He describes the oh God, I can't remember their name, the peoples prior to the Maya, and they had a compact with the dimensions of spirit, with the nature spirits, and they developed rituals that honored cycles, and they called into being the world that they wanted to live in. They called into being, they made it possible for grains to be grown that could provide protein so that they could settle and build a culture. And so I think that it's a combination of whatever technique you need to open spiritually, combined with community, combined with a planetary focus. And that getting into the rituals of nature, getting into restorative habitat or cleanup or whatever in community, combined with a spiritual focus, in gratitude, and a collective envisioning of what the future might be. That's what I would recommend.
Yeah. Self, society, world, cycles. We've got to hold it all in some ways. As the whole system deconstructs, we've got to somehow hold the whole in an integrated way inside ourselves and our communities to be able to navigate through. That's a very profound point in its simplicity. Thank you.
And perhaps also to say, not so much try to hold it together, let it break apart. There are things that need to go. There are ways of being that need to fall away. And so that's why hold to the earth, hold to a community around us, hold to envisioning a future where we're one with each other, we're one with the planet, we can still be individuals, we can live in respect for each other, you know, for the planet, for the natural world around us, and let the rest of it go away. Just let it go, but hold that vision of what's coming, and do it through ritual, community, and some kind of practice that brings you back to peace and anchors you in the planet.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Susan Hess Logeais, everyone. What a remarkable life. It's been a life well lived and a life honestly lived. So I just, Susan, want to acknowledge the integrity and the authenticity with which you've revealed yourself to our global community today. It's quite remarkable, and I thank you very deeply for who you are, and the wisdom that you've been able to glean over your lifetime.
Well, thank you, Jim. I look forward to learning more, working with you and the university that you've created. I'm very interested in your doctoral program in transpersonal.
Susan may be joining our doctoral program to do a research project in transpersonal psychology and philosophy. So this is the kind of doctoral students we like to attract to our university. Well, that'll do it for us for today, everyone. You're all welcome to the after session chat group. Susan, I hope you can join for at least a few minutes.
Yeah.
You'll see the link in the chat box that Stan just put up. So have a good weekend, everyone. And then next week, just so you're holding it, we're going to go into a 5-day program on mental health and youth, where we're really going to look at how young people all over the world, not just in the United States or Europe, are deeply suffering by what's happening at every level. Dr. Jane Goodall is going to be joining us next Thursday as one of the presenters. She's the founder of Roots and Shoots, and it was an organization that was founded to deal with youth and the ecology, and the realizing that youth need to really engage in their inner work now in order to be strong enough to engage with the ecology. And that's one reason why we're looking for people like Susan to bring on to Humanity Rising, because we're at one of those moments in history where it's not just being an activist out there on a particular issue of concern. Equally important is how do we develop our inner strength and fortitude and regenerative vitality so that we're strong enough to do what we need to do in the external world, so that the inner regeneration and the outer regeneration are inseparably linked in this moment of time. And Susan, thank you once again for revealing this inner aspect of an activist such as yourself. It's been beautiful and profound and deeply inspiring. And I thank you on behalf of all of us.
Oh, it's been my pleasure, Jim. Absolutely wonderful to be with you today.
Thank you, everyone. Have a good weekend. We'll see you again next Monday on Humanity Rising. Bye for now.